Good afternoon, collectors and friends. Welcome to Trading Card Therapy, episode number 80. I'm thrilled to be back. I've taken a hiatus the last few weeks as I was traveling a little bit, and this is the first opportunity I've had to record an episode. Today, we have an incredible guest. It is Brian Dwyer, the president of REA, that is Robert Edward Auctions.com. He's going to come on and join me in just a few minutes. Before he does, I wanted to tell you a little bit about my trip and my travels to Phoenix and Scottsdale, Arizona. So normally when I hit the road to take a look at a collection, as Brian will probably attest in just a few minutes, I try to have all my ducks in a row. And with this particular collection, it being very high end, the folks had told me they didn't know if they were going to sell it, but they very much wanted appraisal. They were willing to pay for it. And I figured, it's starting to get a little bit colder here in northern New Jersey. In the October timeframe. So I figured what better time to get out of town than as the leaves start to turn colors here, although it's beautiful, starts to get a little bit colder. Yeah, it was in the 90s. I was able to play tennis out there. I even climbed one of the trails in Camelback Mountain. I think it was Echo Trails, rather difficult. Had a great time. But the first component, the first portion of my trip was looking at this gentleman's collection, something he put together in the 90s, and something to note, which I'm sure Brian can also attest to in just a few minutes, that folks who bought collections or put together collections in the late 80s and the 90s, just before PSA, started grading cards. When we started our meeting, he had asked me, what do you think about grading? I only have a couple cards graded in my entire collection. Do you really believe in it? And I explained it to him as simply as I possibly could. It really isn't necessarily for you or me or the next person. It's really so that the actual card market can function just a little bit more efficiently. And the reason why I put it like that to him is that whether it be you're buying a baseball card or a diamond, if you're not an expert in that particular niche, it would be nice to have a third party, even if you don't trust implicitly or put all of your eggs in that particular company's basket. Thus, for example, NBA, Mike Baker Authenticated was born. So a lot of different things that are happening in the grading world, even today, 25, 35 years later. But nonetheless, I explained to him that some of the cards he had were actually trimmed. And, he hadn't heard that terminology before. And I said, well, I don't know exactly when it happened, but generally it was done to improve the appearance of the card. And so you can see why having a third party, even if it's just a dealer friend, forget about an official, auction house, just someone to give you an opinion on, the card or cards that you have that you're buying. That's really why, grading companies, I think, have flourished, because it's allowed us, meaning the collectors, the dealers, the investors, speculators, and so forth, to partake in, the buying and selling of sports cards with a lot less friction. It doesn't mean that you have to believe PSA that it's a 9. It doesn't mean that you have to believe SGC that it's a 10. It doesn't mean that you have to believe Beckett that they say it's an 8. But I do believe it is nice to have a helping hand, a guiding force, if you will. And so I take it as that, and I explained to him as such. And so over the period of a couple of days, I looked at an extensive collection with some of the best sets in the entire hobby. The verdict is still out as to what they're going to do with the collection. He's considered gifting it to his son over a period of time. Who knows what's going to happen, but certainly I will report on it and put the full story on our blog at blog.justcollect.com. If you are just tuning in to Trading Card Therapy for the first time today and you found us on YouTube, thank you so much for tuning in. But if you're someone who just really likes audio when you're on the go in the car or at the gym, you can actually download and listen to Trading Card Therapy wherever you enjoy your favorite podcasts, such as Spotify and Apple and all those, good places like that. So anyway, getting back to Arizona, it was a great trip, not just because of the collection I was able to see and take a look at, but also some of the people that I was able to meet. I met with Steve, Vintage Slab Man, on Instagram. I met with a really good buddy of mine and his girlfriend and a friend of his. Went out to dinner at a really cool place called Thea, which is a rooftop restaurant at the Global Ambassador, which is actually the hotel I stayed at. Speaking of that hotel, I did do an open house, which I'm sure Brian's done at least a couple of those back in his day. And that means that, you basically advertise that you're going to be, let's just say, in a conference room of a hotel or something like that. in one location for a couple hours in a weekend, and you never know what's going to walk in. And I also made it to a convention that was in Phoenix. So all of that happened in just a matter of a few days. Didn't buy anything major, but I was able to pick up just a couple cards in particular at the Phoenix convention, which I wanted to show off very briefly. So not a high grade 53 Topps Mickey Mantle, but nonetheless, one that I thought for the eye appeal was tremendous. Now there's a little bit of creasing you may or may not be able to see in the upper left. Once again, if you want to view some of the cards and the items that some of our guests show off, you can find all of our episodes of Trading Card Therapy on our Just Collect YouTube channel. So that's a really nice 1.5 53 Topps Mickey. And just one of the other cards that I picked up that I also really enjoyed was an early card of Buck Weaver, who of course is famous or infamous for being a member of the 1919 Black Sox, the team, of course, that lost and threw the World Series to the Reds. And it is the premise of the whole movie, 8 Men Out. All right, I could talk, as you know, for a long time, but I saw Brian just slide back into his chair. So I'm going to bring on Brian Dwyer, president of REA. Hey, Brian, how are you?
I'm good, Leighton. How are you?
So thanks again for joining me today, Brian. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, happy to be here.
So, it's funny. I didn't have an issue coming up with a myriad of questions for you. So we'll try to start off with considering that even though you and I have known each other for a long time, I'm going to try to assume, at least for the beginning, that some people might be tuning into this that don't know you. Yep. So I want to make sure that not only, of course, you have the opportunity to talk about yourself and your company, but a little bit of your background and how you kind of arrived as a president of REA Auctions, today.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you and I go way back. Hard to believe it's probably almost 20 years at this point.
You had to point to my gray hairs without saying so. Come on.
Hey, listen, this is I got plenty of my own, but I've been a collector for the better part of my life. I mean, over 30 years at this point. Got my first cards back in the early 90s. Collected, found eBay in the late 90s, found PSA around 1998, 99. So I've really grown up in this space, and I love it. And I mean, first and foremost, I think like yourself, we're collectors, right? Like, we make our living in this industry, and we work hard day in and day out in the industry. But having known each other for a long time, I think it's pretty obvious we both really love the material, and we love the stuff, and we love the people, and I think that's helpful. I mean, I think that helps with both of our businesses. So, I mean, I went to college thinking that I was going to work in finance, got a degree in finance and accounting. And then the economy was not so great when I came out of school. So luckily for me, I was going to school near SGC, got a job at SGC, spent 3 years there, really learned a tremendous amount, broadened my hobby horizons, left because, I missed the buying and the selling. When you were working at a third-party grading company, they don't really want you being a buyer and a seller. So I left. I started my own company, which still runs to this day, Sterling Sports Auctions. I founded that in 2010. And then I did that for a while until one day the founder of REA called me and said, "Hey, I see what you're doing. I like what you're doing. Do you want to come work for us?" And I hadn't really ever thought about working for somebody else again. I mean, Sterling was going very well. But I tell people it was like the Yankees called me and said, "Hey, you want to play center field against the Red Sox?" So came on, joined REA in 2012, worked there for several years until the founder retired, and then had the opportunity to buy the company, take over the company, and grow the company. And now here, 8.5 years later, when I started, we were doing 1 auction a year. Now we're doing 10, 11 auctions a year. We had 2, 3 employees. Now we've got a couple dozen. So it's been a really fun ride, but it comes back to, I just love the hobby, love the material, and don't feel like I'm working.
That's really cool, Brian, that you still have that feeling even, dozens of employees later and all these years later. I just want to clarify something because I can't believe the time's gone so quickly. I remember it like it was yesterday. So it's been about 8 years and change since you took over REA.
Yeah, January of 2016.
Oh my God. I keep getting older and older during just this actual conversation. So, we might have to keep it short now. Kidding aside, Brian, you've done a tremendous job, not just with, listen, business is candidly dollars and cents, right? And so, I always talk to my employees, hey, if you're not able to pay the bills and pay your employees, you don't really have much of any business.
Sure.
But I think we both agree, after doing this for as long as we have, it's really not just our love of collecting that makes everything tick. It's our team. It's our teams behind us. And I know, for you, you do sometimes do some travel. Of course, every year we can probably bet on it like clockwork. We'll be at the National Sports Collectors Convention. And it means inevitably that someone is either back home taking care of our proverbial work family, meaning our work office, and then, of course, our actual families, as I know that, we both have some children. And so it takes a tremendous amount of effort to not only get to where you are today, Brian, but also to where you continue to aspire to be.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, people are our greatest resource, right? Whether it's people that are helping us do the auctions in our case, or the clients that are there buying and selling with us day in and day out. I mean, we've always believed that the relationship is the most important part of what we do, and it pays off.
Speaking of relationships and that connection to consigners, I am not only interviewing Brian, but I'm also a client. I feel like I was trying to make it analogous to, the hair for men, the men, the commercial I'm talking about with, yes, hair for men. Exactly. So, but the joking aside, you and I have done a lot of business, both as I've consigned to REA, but I've also bought a fair amount of cards probably, through the years. And so, I'm curious from, let's just say, from the standpoint of, before we get into the whole consignment and how that works at your company, talk about, if you're a collector, because this is one of the things I really enjoy about the direction you're taking REA, is that it's no longer just dependent on a catalog auction, but you've added something called an encore auction. And for buyers out there, collectors, and even investors, could you give everyone just a brief rundown on the style and the type of auctions that you guys are running at REA?
Yeah. So, you alluded to the catalog auction, and that's really what REA's hallmark was for many years. In the pre-internet days, you'd send out a big catalog, and we still send out 500-600 page catalog. But what we found over the last several years is that the hobby's moving much quicker than it was in, even 10 years ago. And so there's the need to turn over material. More collectors are becoming pseudo dealers. And the quicker that you can turn material, the better it is for everybody. So we added these monthly encore auctions, which run in the exact same way as a catalog auction for us. They just don't have a catalog. And that's been a huge game changer for us, and our consigners and our buyers. It just puts 3,000-4,000 items a month out for auction on display. And people love them, and it gives the sellers the opportunity to monetize things quicker. It gives the buyers more options. People love doing business with us, so it works out for everybody, and they've been great. We're now on year 3 of doing encores every month.
Wow, that's impressive, Bri.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if you're in a position to share, anything that's like interesting or maybe newsworthy about upcoming plans for REA, but I'm curious, is there, for example, any specialty auctions, planned for the future, or anything else having to do with, let's just say, special events like the All-Star Game or things like that, or special collector focused auctions? Do you have anything like that upcoming?
Yeah, nothing specific, but I think the thing for REA is that we're always open, right? And we're always kind of our ear to the ground, listening to see what needs our clients have and where we might be able to fill those. So, I've watched people and other companies in the industry that do these All-Star and Super Bowl auctions, and I think they'd be very cool. But I know that they're a huge logistical undertaking, and we're all friends. It's a competitive industry, but it's a friendly industry as well. So I know that they're logistical undertakings that I'm not sure if they're for us, but if the opportunity came up, I'd certainly look at it. I think for REA, what we're really looking forward in the next year is just growing what we're already doing. These 3 catalog auctions that we're doing, again, they're our hallmark. The monthly encores continue to grow. And over the years, we've done some specialty auctions when the opportunities arrive. We've done a pre-war set builders auction last November. We've broken some T206 sets exclusively in auctions. So if somebody comes to us and says, "Hey, like I want my own auction," and it makes sense, yeah, we'll absolutely do it. But I think it's just sticking to what we're really good at and building upon that. I think that's what I'm most excited about.
Yeah, no, you guys have built a tremendous platform there. I know that I'm an active bidder, I'm an active consigner, and even if I'm not buying something out of an auction, I can tell you, and it's a little trick I'm sure that a lot of folks have used for your auction house, and maybe others, is I always like to know the highlights of an auction after it's ended. And so your, I believe, latest Encore auction just ended this past Sunday. And of course, I was a bidder in the auction and won some things. But I also wanted to see, for example, what do the 3.5 52 tops mantles sell for? What do the 84 Star Jordan sell for? Because these are bellwethers of our hobby and of our industry. Yeah. And so one of the things that I like to do for an auction like yours, especially when there's no catalog, Bri, is I like to go the day after the auction while it's still fresh in my mind. I not only re-look at my watch list, because that's very specific to me. That's very niche. I added those items one by one myself. But then I also take the first page of your auction, I sort it by highest price. Yep. And then, I don't know if it's an hour, 90 minutes or so, but I go through it. If there's something that seems like an anomaly to me or it's interesting, I might even text you, "Hey, Bri, that's kind of crazy. I saw such and such sell for, so-and-so." So speaking of all of that, I'll first start with your last auction. Doesn't have to be the most expensive item that's sold, but what item in your last Encore auction this past Sunday night, what closing price surprised you? What sold for more than you thought?
Yeah, well, I'll give you two answers there, and one was the most expensive item. We had two items in the auction that each brought $93,000. One was a 52 mantle 3.5, which, if it's not obvious, is one of my favorite cards, and one was that 84 Star Jordan. And starting with the Jordan, we didn't know what to expect because that's a card that has gotten a lot of notoriety lately. And that's a card, there've been a ton of examples sold lately. We didn't know if we were selling into an oversaturated market. And it turned out that it set a record for the grade, outperformed the last 7 by about 35%. Just overall a very, very impressive price. So I was happy for that. We had been in touch with the consignor about expectations, and I think it exceeded everybody's expectations. $93,000 for a mantle 3.5 confirmed that people are all about eye appeal. So it's nice to know that the hobby is buying the card and not the holder all the time, and that was fun. And then I look at some of the stuff, like there was a T206 Fred Merkle with an old mill back in a PSA 2 or 3 MK. And I don't know exactly what it sold for, but I think it was about $2,500. And I thought to myself, why did that go for that price? And so I go to VCP, which is vintagecardprices.com, which, tracks public sales records for the last 20 years or so. And it had been 10 years since one of those had sold. So that's just something that didn't catch anybody's attention, came in as part of a collection. We put it out for the auction, started at $10 like we do all these cards in the monthly auction, and the bidders responded. So that's kind of cool. Anytime you can tell somebody like, "Hey, you had an actual real rarity that you didn't know about," like that's fun.
Oh yeah. Listen, are you kidding me? I'm already thinking about like a lobster dinner that I'd be eating with that newfound money, right?
Yeah.
I made a note about a remark you just made about the mantle, and then I wanted to come back to the mantle and Jordan as well. But specifically, the remark was, you liked, of course, not only the sales price of the mantle, because you're trying to get the most you can for your client, meaning the consignor, but you also said you were happy to see that folks are still migrating towards buying the card and not always the holder. And even though, you and I probably know what that means pretty well, for those that maybe aren't familiar or as familiar with the vintage card high-end world, could you maybe just elaborate on that point for just a minute or two, and then talk about maybe some of the tendencies you've seen over the last year or 2 years with that notion in mind?
Yeah, for sure. So, I've always viewed the grading scale as a pyramid, right? So you've got the 10s on top, which generally there are fewer 10s, but there's also in the eye appeal spectrum, there's less options for what a 10 can look like. You know, most 10s are going to have perfect centering, sharp corners, no surface issues. If you go down to the base of the pyramid where you've got ones, ones are not all created equal. You know, you can have a card that looks like a 10 on the front that's missing its back and it grades a 1, just the same way that a card that's gone through a washer machine grades a 1. And you know, they're going to sell for two wildly different prices. And so when I say you buy the card, not the holder, you look at the card that's being presented, you kind of disregard the grade for a minute, and you say, what's the eye appeal benefit of this? You know, we had some authentics in the last auction that outsold numerically graded examples because the eye appeal was very strong. And people said, look, you know, this card in an 8 would cost me $40,000, but I can buy an authentic for $2,000 that looks like an 8. I'm going to do it. You know?
I don't even know what card it is, and I would love to buy it.
Yeah, it was dynamite. So, you know, eye appeal and saying, okay, the last one sold for $1,000, but it looked like garbage. This one's beautiful. I can pay $2,000-$3,000 for it. Kind of just disregarding the number on the flip and looking at the eye appeal of the card.
You nailed it, Brian. So beauty is most certainly in the eye of the beholder. And when you talked about it as far as grading being a pyramid, you're 100% right that when you get down to that base level of a 1, that ones can look vastly different. And I think what's really wonderful, more so as a collector, let's just say, than an investor, is that, you know, if you had some extra money and you wanted to get some of the most iconic cards in the industry, you could, over time, get them at a fraction of the price. And I think you and I, both coming from where we do, which is not a ton of money in our backgrounds, is there's something about the thrill of the hunt for that example that theoretically could be a 10 on the front, but because some kid wrote his initials on the back when he was 11, you're telling me I'm going to get a $983,000 discount?
Right.
It's really fun if you're immersed in the hobby the way that you and I are, because it's not just dollars and cents for us. We love the cards.
Yep.
You know, you love the 52 Topps mantle. Listen, I have a 52 Topps mantle in my collection. It's low grade, but it looks like a 7. And I don't think I'm going to be able to better it for the money. And I certainly don't want to write a check for what it costs to buy a PSA 7.
Yeah. And I mean, when I bought my first 52 mantle, it was a PSA 1 because it had staple holes in it. And, you know, does it have a crease? Yes, it does have a crease, but does it have 30 creases? No, it's got 2 perfectly placed staple holes at the top. I'll take that every day of the week.
Absolutely. One thing before we move forward, and this wasn't, you know, on my list of planned questions or discussions, but I think the audience would love to hear your opinion, and I'll certainly throw mine in the ring afterwards. But you said the 2 best selling items in your Encore auction literally sold for about or the same price. Mm-hmm. And it happens to be also 2 of like the bellwethers of the respective sport, in that if you don't count the T206 Honus Wagner, you don't count a Babe Ruth rookie, Baltimore News or Sporting News, you know, either way, you'd be talking about a 1952 Topps Mickey Mantle in baseball. And in basketball, even though it may have been of recent notoriety that this card has kind of caught fire, if you will, nonetheless, the numbers don't lie, as this card's been selling for big money in the last 6 to 12 months, is the 1984 star, number 101, Michael Jordan. We'll call it true rookie. So I ask you, Brian, I'm going to put you on the spot. If you could advise someone, they don't care if it's vintage, they don't care if it's modern, but they're telling you they want to deploy 93,000 and change. And I know we're playing Monday morning quarterback here, but if someone came to you and said, what's going to be the best card of the 2 to deploy this 93,000 and change, we'll just call it Crosby's 9 going on 10. We'll say 10 years. Which one of the 2 do you believe you'd recommend, and why?
I would recommend the mantle. And the reason that I would recommend the mantle is that I believe that there is a smaller supply. And I believe that high prices generally pull out that supply. We saw it during COVID where, you know, insert card here was selling for huge money. And then there were more and more and more of them hitting auction. And I think that the Star Jordan is, you know, there's not millions of copies of it, but I think that over time, especially now that PSA grades these cards, You may see more and more of them finding their way into holders. You may find cards being crossed over from companies like Beckett and GAI that graded them in the past. And I think, do we still turn up fresh 52 mantles? Yes, both of us probably, at least a couple a year. But I think the 52 mantle, in my opinion, has a smaller supply, a wider base of appeal, and probably a longer term better buy.
Interesting. Well, I feel like we could have a whole show to debate just that. I almost feel like I'm going to take the opposite just for the sake of discussion.
Sure.
Because it wouldn't be as interesting if I said the mantle also.
Right.
So I'll address what you said to start. So in terms of supply, I think they're probably similar. I don't have the pop reports handy. I know that the 84 star has been rumored, the number 101, has been rumored to have been produced in numbers of about 3,000 to 5,000 units. No one knows exactly what the scoop is. And of course, PSA's only started grading those.
Right. Recently.
So, yeah, recently. So I'm going to say I think the supply is similar. I do think that right now, to piggyback on your comment about higher prices flushing things out, I think the 52 tops Mickey Mantle market is much more mature at the moment.
Sure.
It's had time to settle, whereas there actually is legitimately a run-up happening right now over the last 6, 12, maybe 15 months. I'm not exactly sure on the Star Jordan. So I think there's that to contend with. And let's be honest, right? Real sophisticated long-term investors, they don't like to buy when something's had a big run-up, in recent time, especially in a truncated short period.
Yep.
But the one part where I think I might, at least for the sake of discussion, disagree is that I'm not so sure in 10 years that, and I'm just thinking my son, I think the kids who are 9 now or 10, when they're 20, and I'm not saying that I have the money to buy either card, to be fair, but I feel like the 20-year-olds, the 30-year-olds, I think that Michael Jordan and his merchandise and his Nike deal, I still think it's going to be in it's going to be in the crosshairs of kids. Mm-hmm. They're going to have sweatshirts. They're going to have sneakers. Now, does that equate to them wanting to own a number 101 Jordan? I'm not so sure. But I do believe that we haven't seen the last ever program, meaning The Last Dance, produced on Jordan.
Yeah.
I think there's going to be something else. Now, there might be something else on Mantle, but the difference is that Mantle is no longer living and Jordan is alive and well. There's also the case, and of course, we don't want to talk about people's mortality because I don't find that to be a fun discussion. But I do believe that if Jordan died sooner, if you will, rather than later, and not trying to talk about it in any sort of, way that we're wishing him ill, but I do think, as we've seen with Pete Rose, Willie Mays, the list goes on and on, there's always a short-term bump. So who knows what will happen? Yeah. It's an interesting discussion philosophically. And there really isn't necessarily a right answer, but I would love to know in the comments, if you're listening to this, if you're watching this on YouTube, let Brian and I know. What do you think is the better buy in 10 years? The 1952 Topps Mickey Mantle number 311 or the 1984 Star number 101 Michael Jordan? So, Brian, I'm not going to keep you all day, so I'm going to try to get through the rest of the questions kind of quickly because there's a few things that I personally would like to know, and I think the audience would like to know also. I know you said you took over about 8 or so years ago, but you were working there a few years before that.
Yeah.
So it's a nice duration of time. Mm-hmm. In that time period, of course, you could name the most expensive item that sold. That'll be easy enough, or one of the most expensive. But what I'd like to do is find like another Fred Merkle example. What's something that just is top of mind over the last 10 years? You're like, OMG, I cannot believe we found this in the crevice of a shoebox and it sold for that.
Well, I'll give you not one item, but I'll give you one collection. And it was very early on in my tenure. Probably I'd only worked at REA for like a year or two. And we get a phone call from somebody on Long Island that says, hey, my father passed away and I've got some sports memorabilia. And they sent us pictures, just literal plastic pages in a binder full of cards. And we saw old Judges, we saw T-6s, and they said, we've got a whole room full of this stuff. Can somebody just come out and check it out? So I went out there with another member of the team, and we pull up to the driveway, and there's a dumpster in the driveway. And we walk inside, and we're met by the daughter. and the mom is sitting in the living room in a recliner. And you could just tell that she had a just total disdain for her husband's hobby, and made some comment to the effect of, whatever you don't take is going in that dumpster tomorrow. And we spent probably 5 or 6 hours in this guy's basement. He had a tool bed, like a workshop down there, tools and everything. You could tell that it was just his man cave. And we ended up pulling about $700,000 out of that basement. And I remember there being an old judge card that was previously unknown, and it went for $15,000-$20,000. It was like, in this guy's basement in Long Island, there was one of the rarest cards that 19th century collectors could think about. So that was cool, because I mean, if we had postponed, if we had not answered that call, if we had just kind of said, oh, like, you got to come to us, or you got to send us more pictures, like, that could have all been in a landfill somewhere.
Brian, first of all, appreciate you sharing that story. Second of all, knowing you now for, as you said, a long time, I appreciate that even to this day, with some of the success that you've achieved, that you're still working really hard. And I was just talking to a buddy of mine yesterday, high school friend, even longer than that. He's an attorney, and it's not often that you hear an attorney talk about feeling good about their work. I won't get into his little story because this episode's about you, but I got to imagine, Brian, that doing something like that, even though, yes, you earn your company a commission, make no mistake, you're able to go for that lobster dinner if you so desire, or make sure you could pay the staff timely and maybe even give a bonus, God willing. But let's be candid, you really did something solid on behalf of that family, because who really knows what would have actually happened?
Yeah, it was life-changing money for them. And, we stayed in touch with the daughter throughout the entire process, and she let us know. I mean, that collection ended up selling for as much as their house did. And that was really monumental. And, she was appreciative of the fact that we took the time and care to take her father's collection and make the most of it and spread it around the hobby to people that would appreciate it as much as he did. And that's what we do. I mean, we deal with a lot of people. And I think one of REA's specialties is dealing with people who know nothing about our world, and they come to us and they're looking for guidance and they're looking for expertise. And, we were able to look at that collection and say, okay, this is special. We're going to go check it out. And we were able to look at that old judge and realize that it's not just a $200 common. It's previously unknown, uncatalogued. And so, yeah, did we earn a commission? Of course we did. That's how we keep the lights on. But you're paying for the expertise that myself, my team, that we have, and the ability to take this very messy raw material sometimes and turn it into very valuable, very desirable auction stuff. And that's fun. And that's what I think keeps all of us coming back every day.
Yeah, I know, Brian, you said it really well, because even though, my company Just Collect does things a little bit differently, as we're not an auction house than REA, we've both kind of sent each other leads back and forth before, because let's be candid, sometimes you can't get to that person's house right away. Sure. And that, maybe Leighton and someone from his team can get there, or vice versa. Yep. This person is hell-bent on an auction process, and there isn't anyone that I would rather recommend them at least starting their journey with, is to talk to you, Brian, and someone from your team at REA. And so, it's interesting that even though we go about this differently, we both really we love the thrill of the chase.
Yeah.
Like we are professional treasure hunters. We just go about the mechanics a little bit differently.
Yeah. And I mean, you've had some great scores over the years. We've had some great finds and collections, and, a lot of them just come in as very innocuous emails. Like, I've got some old baseball cards. I don't know what I have. And it's like, we've had some of our biggest headline makers have been very unassuming inquiries. And so that's why you answer them all. And that's why you treat them all the same. So.
Brian, we recently added someone to our team here at Just Collect and Acquisitions. And the reason that we did is for the exact reason you just stated. Some of our best finds have been, have old cards, please call. Or to be fair, have old cards, don't like the phone, please email. And you're like, what?
Yeah.
But meanwhile, you write a nice email. Hi, Teresa. Thanks for, blah, blah. And all of a sudden, who knows what'll be out there. But speaking of nice collections, because I'd be remiss if we didn't bring this up, I know you had something very special happen in the last few months with some Babe Ruth rookies and cards. So I'll let you take it away from there, Bryce. You could tell the audience who's listening. And for those that are on YouTube, and by the way, this is being taped, so you can pause, rewind if you like certain parts. But this is going to be a good part, folks.
Yeah. So, I mean, we announced probably just about 2 weeks ago now that we have found, brought to us on consignment, the first known example of Babe Ruth's 1916 Sporting News rookie card. It's known in the hobby as the Sporting News, but with a Morehouse baking ad back. And to 99% of the population, that means nothing. But to Babe Ruth collectors, to pre-war collectors, to hobby diehards, it is hugely significant. And I didn't know if we would talk about it. I thought we would, but I brought it with me. So this is the card. And
I mean, Bri, that has tremendous eye appeal for a 3.5.
Oh yeah, it's killer. It's
you should have put your hand over the grade first, which, by the way, I was going to recommend to folks. Joking aside, I've started doing this myself. When you go to conventions, if you're looking at like 552 Manals or 559 Tops Alk lines, just put your little thumb over the grade of the cards and just pick which one you like the most first. The results might surprise you sometimes. But anyway, Bri, back to you.
Yeah, and I mean, it just honestly goes back to what we were talking about 15 minutes ago, right? Yeah. Like this looks like a 5 or a 6.
I would say it looks like a solid X card. If that was in a big screw case back in 1987, someone might say it's X plus.
Yeah. So this is the first one that'll come up for auction. It's got this ad on the back. So in 1916, a company out of Chicago called Felix Mendelssohn made these cards, 200 in a set, and then they kind of sold the rights, I guess, to various manufacturers around the country to put their ads on the back. And Morehouse Baking was a company up in Massachusetts that put their ad on these cards. And in the last 20 plus years that PSA and SGC have been around, there's been fewer than 100 cards graded from the entire set. And we turned up about 120 new ones. And,
unbelievable.
So the Ruth is the major highlight. There's a Joe Jackson. There's a Jim Thorpe. There's about 15 other Hall of Famers. But it's going to be a really fun offering because we know what Ruth rookies with no ads on the back go for. We know what Ruth rookies with common ads on the back go for. But it's been a long time since we've seen a professional rookie 1916 Red Sox Ruth card sell with an unknown ad on the back.
I can already hear you on Bloomberg or whatever other station will be lucky enough to have you do the interview about the card. It is an incredible specimen. It's an incredible piece of baseball card history. If you are uncomfortable to give an estimate, I understand, but can you give our audience just a rough idea of the range you think it could sell for at REA's next catalog auction?
Yeah, I mean, I can just tell you, there have been sales recently in the mid 6 figures for comparably graded examples. And then when you throw on the fact that it's the first known, that it's an ad that people did not know existed on this Ruth before, I think that puts a premium on it. So we're opening the bidding at about $150,000. To us, that indicates that it's worth, 3, 4, 5 times worth that opening, hopefully. So nothing would surprise me. I mean, that's why we play the game. So it'll be
yes,
fun.
I think that, Brian, you're being a little bit conservative and modest, as you should be as an auctioneer. But I think that there's a very real chance, based on all of the facts you just gave, and keep in mind, you and I are probably in the same camp here. I believe provenance is a factor here.
Yeah.
This is not something that is circulated and it's the only one known. This is a fresh to the hobby find of incredible, almost, 100+ year cards that have survived in incredible condition. And in the case of the back, has never been seen before with this back. I believe there's a chance it could sell for $1 million.
I hope so.
Yeah, I'm sure you do. I'm sure the consignor does as well. So, Bri, let me switch gears for a minute because we could spend literally a whole episode just on that. And I know we're getting to the time here. So if we could, because let's be honest, right? You and I, we still can't buy that Ruth rookie, but we've come a long way since we've started. So for the collectors that are out there that are watching this, that are drooling over the Ruth rookie, that really want to buy a 52 Topps card, but they're never going to be able to, what kind of direction would you give a collector, cards or otherwise? It could be memorabilia, with someone that has a modest budget, but that when they're putting together their collection, they could feel good that in 5, 10, 20 years down the line, they haven't bought the equivalent of 1989 Topps baseball.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think I have always advocated to people to collect what you like. Right. And so first and foremost, I think if 89 Topps baseball makes you excited and you want to get up at night and search eBay for one of those, then God bless, But if you are saying, look, this is a finite amount of money that I have to play with, and I want to make sure it doesn't evaporate, I think that in any collectible field over time, the biggest and the best names have proven to be the best long-term investments. And I advocate to people to collect the best that you can afford. So, it surprises me how many collections I see where the commons are in 9s and the stars are in 1s and 2s. And, I would flip it on its head and stretch a little and buy a Mickey Mantle 52 and a 5 and collect no commons if you need to, So the biggest and the best names, the top tier Hall of Famers, the best condition that you can afford. And, one of the things that I tell people is don't buy anything that has an asterisk next to it. And what I mean by that is if you can't tell somebody what this is in the time it takes you to go in an elevator up a floor, then you've lost them, So this is Babe Ruth's first card as a professional.
Oh, by the way, a really rare back that's never been seen before. If you wanted to add a few more words.
Right. I mean, the 1914 Baltimore News, he's a semi-professional, obviously minor leaguer, but this is his first one as a major league professional on an individual card. Boom.
Done.
So I see people that buy qualified cards with qualifiers. I see people that buy unlicensed cards. I see people that buy, manufactured whatevers. Stick with the tried and true, and I think you'll do okay.
Yeah, no, listen, I think it's great advice. I'm going to try to rapid fire the last few questions here. I'm going to put you on the spot. What is one thing from having worked at a major grading company like SGC that you learned there that has helped you even 20 years later with just the way you look at cards, the way you handle them, and your overall knowledge?
I think that SGC was hugely important in my formation. I mean, on a personal level, I learned so much about every type of card. I mean, we would handle 19th century through modern on a daily basis. So it made me better in what I do. I think the thing that I learned that I now preach to people in my day-to-day is that a graded card is not necessarily a more valuable card. I saw a lot of people submitting cards that were worth less than the plastic that they were in. And I think that's a mistake that a lot of novices or people who maybe are trying to sell their collection before they find someone like you or me, they spend a ton of money on grading and they don't need to. And so I think that I saw a lot of stuff come through at SGC that I wouldn't have graded for free probably. And I think that that's the case at every grading company. But I think that grading really should be seen. I mean, obviously, if you just want to preserve it and protect it, that's one thing. But from an investment and return on investment perspective, grading needs to add value. And so I think that's something that I learned there.
Yeah, listen, very, very well said. In fact, believe it or not, one of my most read blogs on my blog at justcollect.com's website is, should I get my cards graded? And I remember years ago when I put it out, I don't think anyone's going to read this.
Yeah.
And I've never worked at a grading company, Bri, but I know firsthand, from folks like you, people don't necessarily know. And in fact, what they do is they look on eBay and they'll see, I'm making it up, right? A PSA 10 of such and such advertised at $1 million. Meanwhile, the card's worth $83. But they don't actually know that. So they're like, oh, I'll pay $20 each to get my cards graded.
Right.
Meanwhile, they got a bill of $1,953 and they're like, I can't make rent this month.
Right. No, it's wild. You have to see the information, but also interpret the information.
Listen, that's what makes VCP, Card Ladder, and something that I wanted to kind of touch upon if we had more time is don't just look at data in the industry and look at it as very black and white.
Yeah.
You have to try to take it all together. And if you're not sure, that's why guys in the industry like Brian, who are very knowledgeable, and I'll throw myself in the ring as well, and others, if you have a question, like just because you're not going to necessarily win the card in Brian's auction, if you email them a question about, hey, I don't really quite understand something about this listing, they're going to email you back.
Yeah.
And so that's something that, I've done myself. I'll even feel bad. I'll do it the day of the auction because I'll fall in love with an item and but they're there for you, to help. And I've always found that to be very useful. To get back to your prior experience. So you and I know who Rob Lifson is, but for those that are not watching, those that are watching, but maybe not been in the hobby for a long time, they may not. So Rob Lifson's been around the hobby for a long time. And, he predates you and I, candidly, by probably a few decades.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious, with the time that you had, the short time that you had with Rob, is there something that you took away or learned from Rob that you carry with you to even this day that helps you run REA?
Yeah, I mean, it's just the sharing of knowledge. I mean, Rob was at the table when a find of turkey reds walked in. Rob was at the table when they brought in Goudy sheets that were rescued from the dumpster. I mean, Rob was a fixture on the cards circuit for 20 plus years. And so, being in the office with him and having him share these anecdotes and having him share his own experience, reading the archive of everything that he had sold before I even came around. I mean, we still lean on that to this day. So it was a great way to learn, tremendous stories, forgotten more than we'll ever know probably. But I mean, there's no one thing. It's just that combination of everything.
Brian, some of my fondest memories of our relationship is when you didn't run REA and Vintage Breaks didn't even exist. And I was just doing previewing for probably like the whole day, like 8 hours at a time. And, I would take a break. We would, have some laughs over lunch. Rob would kind of, briskly walk in, and you never know. Maybe that would be the day that Turkey Reds would be coming in or Goudy Uncut Sheets would be coming in. So I feel similar to you that it's really just the overall experience of kind of being part of the whole REA ecosystem for the last 20 years, both as a buyer and a consigner. I've learned a lot from Rob. I've learned a lot from you and also from your teammates as well.
Yeah, no, it's what makes the hobby go round, right? Sharing the information and what we started talking about, 45 minutes ago, relationships. So
yeah. So I'll take that as a subtle hint about the time. So I have one or two more questions.
I have all
I know. I like to joke. So Brian, this one, and by the way, Brian was not presented with any of these questions before, so it gets a little bit more difficult now. I want to ask you, so the audience can hear, what your opinion is in terms of where you see opportunity in the hobby. It could be anything. It could be to go after kids. It could be, I'd like to see regulation in this area. It could be the food at the National is terrible. I know knock at the National, but the food isn't so great. But anyway, joking aside, where is an opportunity or two? I'm going to go after you. But where is a place of opportunity that you see?
Well, I mean, I love the National. I've been going to the National since 2003 when it was in Atlantic City. I'm excited to see some of the changes that the National brings in. I'm hopeful that there'll be some new venues. But having been on the floor back in July or August, whenever it was this year, I mean, there were a ton of people there, a ton of kids. And I feel like that's exciting. The first National back after COVID had more kids than I'd ever seen at a show in my life before. And I think that that's great, right? Like, you've got a 9-year-old son. I mean, the next generation is important. I've got kids. So these shows that are immersive and experiential, I think will be interesting. We just did a show down in Charlotte. We did one in Nashville that were, newer. Maybe the Charlotte was the first time. The Nashville one been around a couple of years maybe, but they drew a ton of people. And so I'm not saying that everybody go out and start a show, but I think that there's a lot of opportunity to build upon existing shows and then bring some shows to major metropolitan areas that maybe are underserved or are not served, and really grow the hobby. I mean, the buzz in the room. We did one in Columbia, South Carolina, Charlotte, North Carolina, and Nashville, Tennessee, and they were very, very strongly attended. So I think that that's one thing. And then I think, there's a lot of data out there and we're getting thrown numbers on a daily basis. I think somebody that could rein it all in and make it analytical in a way that maybe the financial markets use, I think that there's value in that. I know that I would certainly consume it. I think a lot of people would. So maybe just like some more robust data, hobby periodicals, stuff like that.
Oh, listen, we could literally have a whole episode just about that. Shout out to my friend Larry Solomon, who's also a client of your company's, Bry, collector of Unopened, and he was a guest a few episodes ago on Trading Card Therapy. And, he comes from like the world of consulting. So Accenture, used to be a partner at Anderson Consulting. He's the head of HR and PA at a different company. And he was talking about data where he sees a big opportunity. And I agree with you, because I think right now with pricing being the way it is, I still feel like it's one dimensional. I feel like there's got to be a way to get all this data together, working harder for all of us, and us being, whether it be you own an auction house, whether it be you're a collector, a dealer, an investor. To be fair, a lot of us are hybrids these days, all those together. No, I think those are great points. I'll keep mine simple. The first one is, and I know we're both very partial to Cooperstown, New York, but when I was a super young guy, a super young kid, the first time I ever went to Cooperstown, beyond the actual museum itself, well, there was another museum. It was the Larry Fritsch Museum. Yeah. It was very small, but man, did I fall in love that day. And so, there's collectors that are very well known in the hobby, the Platt family in Florida, and I can think of countless others, but I don't know of a specific card museum. And so I think that with Topps and Fanatics doing everything they're doing, I think you could come up with, even if it's a pop-up, like just during the holiday time, you would get collectors to lend their cards. But how amazing would that be during the holiday season of like September through December or October, November, December in New York City? You could see 100 of the world's, not even just best, most interesting cards, right? Under one roof, sponsored by Topps, right? Sponsored by REA or just collect, whatever the case is. So I think that would do a lot to both serve the existing fan base. Like you and I would go see that. There's no doubt.
100%.
But I think that there's value into who it would attract as far as people who are not in the space. And then my other idea, which has been talked about before, but I've heard that it's more of a viable idea than ever, is a global set registry. And there's nothing to do with the old company, Global Authenticated, GAI. But, listen, it's a real, if you will, conundrum in the hobby right now that, especially with collectors having bought SGC, it's kind of a little bit out there that at the very least, even if there wasn't a global registry, couldn't we maybe combine the SGC and the PSA set registries? What do you feel about that?
I think it would be a massive win for the hobby. I mean, I know that people were talking about that combined set registry back when I worked at SGC, which is 15 years ago now. So yeah, I think if they could pull that off, it'd be a big boom. I think it would allay some of the concerns about what's going to happen to SGC, what's going to happen to PSA. Are they going to form a new super company? Are they going to go? Is one going to go away? I mean, there's all sorts of hypotheses out there. So yeah, I mean, I would advocate for it, and I think it would be beneficial in almost every way.
Agreed. Now, Bry, I want to make sure that we give you an opportunity as we're finishing up here, even though there's a lot of reasons why to utilize your company, REA, and your team. But in a nutshell, why, if someone who is more specifically in the hobby, right? Because we don't know how many people outside the hobby are going to necessarily consume this. But regardless, what are one or two, stark reasons that you feel that people should reach out to your company, REA, about their collectibles? And if they are interested in talking to you, how would they find you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that when it comes to people that are in the hobby, they're mostly concerned about the reach of a company and the results from a company. And I think that we hit the reach and results pretty incredibly well. We've got a global reach, clients in more than 2 different countries. We've been at this for over 30 years. I'd put our mailing list up against anybody's in the industry, and the results speak for themselves. I mean, consistent record-breaking sales in every auction, whether it's a monthly auction, a catalog auction, handled some of the biggest record-setting items in cards and memorabilia. So I think that those are the 2 main reasons. And then there's a ton of other reasons. We're collectors. We understand this is what we do day in and day out. If you want to have a conversation, if you want to see what we do, if you want to check out some of our results, just go to our website, robertedwardauctions.com. Everything is free to consume. There's no paywall. There's no registration requirements. You can look at data going back to 2003. You can send us an email right from the website, have a conversation. It can be basic. It can be advanced. We can give you an idea of what we think something's worth. This is what we do, and we'd be happy to answer some questions.
That's great. Well, I wanted to close with, because, we haven't talked really that much about it since, but it was a pleasure to work with you and being able to secure that 1935 Gaudi uncut sheet for one of your clients. And I know we haven't talked about the other sheet that the gentleman had, but believe it or not, so the guy used to play like Division I college baseball, who owned it and found it, and had an injury like many of us have had that kind of stopped his career. But speaking of Cooperstown, he's in talks with lending the other sheet to them for a little bit of time. Wow. And it's kind of caused him to dive very deep into this rabbit hole of cards and collecting. And so maybe for a different day, we'll tell the longer story of how things transpired that day. But it was a lot of fun working together. I'm glad we were able to do something to secure that sheet for your client.
Yeah, super, super cool item, and crazy story how it all played out. But that's, again, we said it earlier, that's why we keep waking up and doing this. You never know what's going to be on the other side of the phone. Absolutely.
Well, Brian, thank you so much for taking the time today, for telling people a little bit about your company, for sharing a little bit about your history in the hobby and elsewhere. And I look forward to doing a lot more business with you in the future.
Yeah, for sure. Happy to be here as a guest. I've watched a lot of the episodes as a fan, so happy to spend the time with you.
Well, I'm honored, Brian. Thanks again. And if anyone wants to reach out to Brian and his team, once again, it's robertedwardauctions.com. Thanks, Brian.
See you later. Thanks.
All right, gang, that concludes our 80th episode of Trading Card Therapy. If you enjoyed the hobby content that you saw today, please make sure that you like and subscribe to my Just Collect YouTube channel so you'll know each and every single time we drop a new piece of hobby content. Until next time.